Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Out here in the Pacific Northwest, the map is covered in places most people never think about again. Logging towns, dead mill communities. Little strips of houses pressed right up against the tree line. From a distance, they look quiet. Up close, some of them feel like the forest has been swallowing secrets for decades. Tonight's cases all come out of those places. A beloved boarding house saint in rural Oregon, whose treatment room turned out to be a torture lab, and the forgotten child she raised inside the walls. A Washington IT tech who used social media check-ins to hunt women through the Olympic rainforest like game. A coastal cliff town where a random coordinate app led 3 students to 2 bodies packed into waterproof cases. A councilman whose voice might be carrying something no one is supposed to hear. And a Shermanwood Ridge couple so deep into simulation theory, they decided their own children were glitches that had to be deleted. Before the stories start, say in the comments where you are listening from and whether you would still move to a small Pacific Northwest town after hearing these. Also, YouTube tells me that only about 4% of the people who watch these videos are actually subscribed. If you're in that other 96%, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It's free, it helps more than you think, and it keeps this channel digging up the stories that never should have been buried. Now turn down the lights, and let's head into the trees. Story 1. I still think about that night in Blackwood Creek. Not a day goes by where I don't wonder what would have happened if I'd looked away, if I'd minded my own business, if I'd just let the past stay buried. But I didn't. And what I found in that house changed everything I thought I knew about evil. My name's not important. What matters is that I spent 24 years as a detective in a small Oregon town where the rain never stops and secrets rot in the fog like old lumber. I was 42 when I first heard about the Vance boarding house. The year was 1998, and I'd just made detective. My partner back then was a guy named Randall Kemp. He was the kind of cop who trusted his gut over evidence, and I was the kind who trusted the numbers over instinct. Together, we made a decent team, even if we drove each other crazy most days. The Vance boarding house sat on the edge of town where the forest pressed in close and the streetlights gave up trying to push back the darkness. It was one of those places that looked normal enough during the day, but at night it had this weight to it, like the building itself was holding its breath. Matilda Vance ran the place. Everyone called her Tilly. She was in her 50s then, with gray hair always pulled back tight in a bun, and these pale blue eyes that never seemed to blink. The town loved her. She took in the people nobody else wanted. Foster kids who'd been bounced around too many times, elderly folks with no family left, people with disabilities who couldn't hold down regular work. She gave them all a room and 3 meals a day and asked for almost nothing in return. Just help around the house and attendance at her nightly prayer sessions. That's what she called them anyway. But I didn't trust her. I can't explain why. Something about the way people talked about her felt wrong. They used words like saint and angel and blessed, but their eyes never quite matched their smiles. It was like they were reciting lines they'd been taught rather than speaking from genuine feeling. Randall thought I was being paranoid. He told me I was looking for monsters where there were only good people trying to survive in a town that had forgotten how to take care of its own. Maybe I was. Maybe I just had a chip on my shoulder about anyone the community put on a pedestal. But then the reports started coming in. 3 people who'd been staying at the boarding house just vanished over the course of 6 months. One was an older man named Otis Crowley, who'd lived there for 2 years. Another was a young woman named Simone Blake, who'd been in and out of foster care her whole life, and had finally found what seemed like a stable place to land. The third was a teenager named Luis Medina, who had some kind of learning disability and had been with Tilly since he was 14. All three had been living at Tilly's place, and then one day they were just gone. No forwarding address, no goodbyes, no phone calls to friends or former caseworkers. Nothing. When we asked Tilly about it, she had an answer ready for each one. Otis had moved to live with a nephew in California. Simone had gotten a job opportunity in Seattle. Luis had been placed with a relative in Idaho. She had this way of smiling when she said it that made my skin crawl, like she was daring us to call her a liar. I started digging on my own time. I pulled records from the water department and the sewage company. The Vance property was using an insane amount of water, triple what any other residential property in town was using. Their septic tank was being pumped twice as often as any other residence in the area. When I asked the company about it, they said Tilly always paid in cash and always explained it away as plumbing problems or laundry from taking care of so many people. I brought it to my sergeant, and he told me to drop it. He said Tilly Vance was a pillar of the community, and I was wasting department resources chasing a woman whose only crime was being too generous. But I couldn't let it go. Randall agreed to help me, even though he thought I was wrong. That's the kind of partner he was. We started watching the house at night on our own time. We'd park down the street with the lights off and just wait. For 2 weeks, we saw nothing unusual. Residents coming and going, Tilly working in her garden during the day, lights going on and off at reasonable hours. Then, one night around 2 a.m., I saw Tilly come out the back door dragging something heavy wrapped in plastic sheeting. She loaded it into a wheelbarrow and pushed it toward the woods behind the property. The way she moved was methodical, practiced, like she'd done this before. I wanted to follow her, but Randall grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a bruise. He said we didn't have probable cause. He said we'd lose our badges if we went onto her property without a warrant. He was right. But I swear I've never hated being right more than I did that night. We sat there and watched her disappear into the trees, and neither of us said a word for the rest of the shift. I went to the county records office the next day and pulled every file I could find on the Vance property. Turns out the house was built in 1922 during Prohibition. It had been used as a smuggling operation for Canadian whiskey, coming down through the logging routes. The original builder had constructed a network of hidden crawl spaces inside the walls so runners could move contraband without being seen from the outside. Most of the records were incomplete and half destroyed by a fire in the 1960s, but there were partial blueprints showing passages that ran through every floor. The walls were insulated with layers of lead paint and asbestos, which was standard for the era. That detail stuck with me, but I didn't know why yet. It took another month of compiling evidence before I had enough to convince a judge to sign a warrant. The chemical analysis of the septic runoff showed traces of lye at levels that couldn't be explained by normal household use. Lye is what you use to dissolve organic matter. It's what people use when they want to make a body disappear without leaving evidence behind. The judge was reluctant, but the numbers didn't lie. We raided the house on a Tuesday morning in October. I'll never forget the smell. It hit us the second we opened the door. Bleach and ammonia and something underneath it all that was sweet and rotting. The kind of smell that gets into your clothes and your hair, and you can't wash it out for days. Tilly was in the kitchen making breakfast like nothing was wrong. Scrambled eggs and toast laid out on the table for 6 people. She smiled at us when we came in. She asked if we wanted coffee. Her voice was so calm it was almost hypnotic. We found the treatment room in the basement. That's what she called it. She said it so casually when we asked what the locked door was for. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was set up like some kind of spa from hell. There were old porcelain tubs filled with water that was still steaming, even though no one should have been using them. Next to them were metal tables with leather straps worn smooth from use. The walls were lined with bottles of bleach and lye and industrial cleaning agents. In the corner was a drain that led directly to the septic tank. On the wall, she'd hung motivational posters about cleanliness and godliness. The contrast was surreal. Tilly didn't resist when we arrested her. She just kept smiling. She said she'd been helping people. She said they came to her sick and broken and full of sin, and she cleansed them. She said the boiling water purified their bodies and the starvation purified their souls. She said they thanked her for it. They begged for more. They understood what she was doing for them. She said it like she genuinely believed every word. Like she was confused about why we were treating her like a criminal when she was doing the Lord's work. We never found the bodies. The lie had done its job too well. But we had enough evidence to charge her. Chemical residue, financial records showing she'd been collecting disability and Social Security checks for people who were no longer alive. Testimony from a former resident who'd escaped before the treatments got too severe. Her lawyer convinced her to take a plea deal. Manslaughter instead of murder. 20 years instead of life. It felt like a failure, but the prosecutors said it was better than risking a trial we might lose. Small-town juries are unpredictable, especially when the defendant is a white-haired woman who quotes scripture. As they were taking her away in handcuffs, I looked up at the house one last time. The afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, and I saw something move in the attic window. Just a shadow shifting behind the glass. Quick enough that I almost missed it. I sent 2 officers up to check it out, but they came back 20 minutes later saying the attic was empty. Just dust and old furniture and boxes of Christmas decorations. I figured it was a trick of the light or maybe a bird that had gotten in through a broken window. I figured wrong. I retired in 2019. By then I was 63 and my knees were shot and I'd seen enough darkness to last a lifetime. Randall had died 2 years earlier from a heart attack, and after that the job didn't feel the same. I moved to a cabin about an hour outside Blackwood Creek, near a lake where I could fish and not think about the things I'd seen. I thought I was done with that place, but you don't really leave a case like that behind. It follows you. It shows up in dreams. It makes you question every kindly old woman you see at the grocery store. When I heard Tilly Vance was being released in October 2022, I felt something twist in my gut. She'd served her full 20 years. Didn't get time off for good behavior because she never admitted she'd done anything wrong. She was 72 years old. Most people would have said she'd paid her debt to society. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, that we'd missed something back in 1998. So I drove to the prison on the day she got out, and I waited in the parking lot like some kind of obsessed vigilante. She walked through those gates at 9 a.m. looking smaller than I remembered, thinner. Her hair was completely white now, and she moved with this careful shuffle, like her bones might break if she moved too fast. But her eyes were the same, pale blue and unblinking. A cab picked her up, and I followed at a distance. I thought maybe she'd leave the state, start over somewhere new where nobody knew her name. But she didn't. She went straight back to Blackwood Creek. straight back to the place where everything had happened. She checked into a motel called the Sea Mist. It was the kind of place that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask questions as long as you paid in cash. I parked across the street and watched her window. She didn't turn on any lights. She just sat in the dark. I could see her silhouette in the chair by the window. She didn't move for hours. I kept thinking she was waiting for something or someone, but nobody came. I must have dozed off around 4 a.m. because when I opened my eyes, the sun was coming up, and her door was hanging open. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the room through the window. Empty. The bed hadn't been slept in. I got out of my car and crossed the parking lot. My heart was pounding. The door was unlocked. Inside the room was exactly how housekeeping would have left it. Clean sheets, fresh towels, except for one thing. There was mud on the floor, fresh mud in the shape of footprints leading from the door to the window. The prints were small, too small to be Tilly's. They looked like they belonged to someone with bare feet. I followed the tracks outside. They led into the woods behind the motel, heading in the direction of the old Vance property. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I knew I should call someone, but I didn't know who. I wasn't a cop anymore. I had no authority. No badge, no gun. I was just an old man chasing ghosts. But I couldn't stop. So I just started walking through the wet underbrush, following the path I knew by memory. The house looked worse than I remembered. 24 years of neglect had taken their toll. The windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling in long strips. The whole structure leaned slightly to the left, like it was trying to fold in on itself. There was crime scene tape across the front door, but it was old and faded, and half of it had torn away. I tried the handle. Locked. I went around back through the overgrown garden that had turned into a jungle of weeds and blackberry bushes. The rear door had been forced open recently. The wood around the lock was splintered and fresh. Someone had been here within the last few hours. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me again. Bleach and ammonia. After all these years, it was still there, soaked into the walls and floorboards. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, showing empty rooms filled with broken furniture and water damage. Wallpaper hanging in strips. Ceiling tiles collapsed on the floor. I called out Tilly's name. No answer. Just the sound of my own breathing and the creak of old wood settling. I made my way down to the basement. The stairs creaked under my weight, and I had to grip the railing to keep from falling. The wood was soft with rot. The treatment room was still there. The tubs, the tables, everything exactly where we'd left it. Like a museum exhibit of human cruelty. And in the center of the room, strapped to one of the metal tables, was Tilly Vance. She was dead. I could tell from across the room. Her body was twisted at angles that weren't natural, and there was blood everywhere. On the table, on the floor, on the walls in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Someone had tortured her the same way she tortured her victims. The symmetry was horrifying. I moved closer, even though every instinct told me to run. That's when I saw the writing. Scrawled on the wall in her blood was one word in shaky letters. Mother. I heard footsteps behind me and spun around. A man was standing in the doorway. He was maybe 40 years old, with dark hair that was going gray at the temples and a tired face that said he'd seen too much. He was holding a badge in one hand, and his other hand was resting on the gun at his hip. He said his name was Andrew Crosby. He said he was a detective with the Blackwood Creek Police Department. He asked me what I was doing there, and I told him the truth. I told him everything. About Tilly, about the case in 1998, About the people who vanished. About following her from the prison. About the footprints in the motel room. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he nodded slowly. He said he knew who I was. He said he'd read my case files when he first started working the new murders. He said there was something I needed to see. Andrew led me back upstairs to the main floor. He pulled out a tablet and showed me thermal imaging footage from inside the house. He said he'd installed cameras 3 years ago after a series of murders in the area. Bodies had been found in the woods near the property. All of them women between 40 and 60. All of them killed in ways that matched Tilly's methods. Boiling water burns, signs of starvation, leather strap marks. But Tilly had been in prison. So who was doing the killing? He said he'd tried everything to catch whoever was responsible. Motion sensors, cameras, stakeouts. He'd spent hundreds of hours watching footage and walking the property. Nothing worked. The sensors never triggered. The cameras never showed anything. But the bodies kept appearing, one every few months, always displayed in the woods like some kind of sick art installation. I looked at the thermal footage on his tablet. It showed nothing but empty rooms, the heat signatures of mice in the walls, the slow cooling of the pipes. Then I understood. I asked Andrew if he knew about the walls. He looked confused. I told him about the crawl spaces, the passages built during Prohibition. I told him about the lead paint and asbestos in the insulation. I said that's why his cameras couldn't see anything. Lead blocks thermal imaging. Whoever was living in those walls was invisible to his technology. We found a sledgehammer in what used to be the kitchen. I swung it at the pantry wall, and the plaster crumbled away like sand. Behind it wasn't studs or insulation. It was empty space, a narrow corridor barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The darkness inside seemed to breathe. Andrew pulled out his gun, and I wished I'd brought mine. We climbed into the wall one at a time. The passage was dark and cramped, and the air was thick with dust that made us both cough. Our phones provided the only light. We moved slowly, following the corridor as it twisted through the house. The walls were covered in scratches, hundreds of them, thousands. Like someone had been keeping track of time by carving lines into the wood, or like they'd been trying to claw their way out. We found the nest in a space between the attic and the second floor. There were blankets that looked like they'd been stolen from clotheslines, empty bottles, stolen food wrappers from convenience stores. There were photographs torn from magazines showing women's faces, all of them middle-aged, all of them stern-looking, like teachers or mothers. And there was a file. A child services file from 1990 with water damage and mold spots. The name on it was Stuart Ashby. Andrew read it out loud in a whisper. Stuart had been placed in Tilly's care when he was 8 years old. He'd been born to a mother who died of an overdose when he was 5 and a father who was serving life for murder. He had developmental delays and behavioral problems. He'd been in 6 foster homes before Tilly. No one else wanted him. The file said he'd run away in 1994 at age 12. But he hadn't run away. Tilly had kept him. She'd raised him in the walls. She'd trained him to be her helper, to watch through cracks in the plaster, to move the bodies when the treatments went too far. And when she went to prison, she'd left him behind like a piece of furniture she didn't need anymore. For 28 years he'd lived in these walls, surviving on whatever he could steal, growing into something that wasn't quite human anymore. That's when we heard it. A sound like breathing, but wrong, too fast, too shallow, like an animal panting. Andrew raised his gun, and I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, which was an old iron dinner bell covered in rust, the same kind Tilly had used to summon her residents for treatment. We moved toward the sound. Stuart came at us from above. He dropped from a gap in the ceiling and knocked Andrew to the ground before either of us could react. The gun went flying into the darkness. I couldn't see much in the dim light from our phones, but I could hear them struggling. Stuart was making this noise that wasn't quite human. A wet, gasping sob. I could smell him. Unwashed skin and rot and fear. I remembered what Tilly used to do, how she controlled people. I raised the bell and rang it as hard as I could. The sound was deafening in that tight space. Stuart froze. He let go of Andrew and backed away, making this whimpering sound. He was looking around like he was searching for something. His eyes were huge and pale. Adapted to the darkness, he kept saying "mother" over and over. His voice was high and broken like a child's. Andrew took the opportunity and grabbed him. They went down hard. Andrew managed to get him into a hold using his weight advantage and training. Stuart thrashed and screamed, but Andrew held on until he stopped moving. We dragged him out of the walls into the daylight. When the sun hit his skin, he started screaming again. It was the first time he'd seen the sun in nearly 30 years. When the backup arrived, they found Stuart curled in a ball on the front lawn, crying. He was skeletal and pale, and his eyes couldn't adjust to the light. He kept asking where his mother was. They found evidence in the walls linking him to 8 murders, all women between the ages of 40 and 60, all killed and dressed up like dolls in clothing from the 1990s. He'd been looking for a new mother, someone to replace Tilly, someone to tell him he was good. And when Tilly came back, he'd punished her for abandoning him, for leaving him in the dark. I think about Stuart sometimes, about what he could have been if someone had actually looked for him in 1994, if someone had checked those walls. But no one did. We all assumed he'd run away, like the file said. We left him there to rot, and he became something that wasn't quite human anymore. A boy who grew up in the dark, believing his only purpose was to serve his mother. When she left him, he did the only thing he knew how. He kept trying to find her, over and over, in every stern-faced woman he could catch. The house was demolished 6 months later. They brought in excavators and tore it down to the foundation. They found bones in the septic tank. 11 people. All the ones who disappeared while Tilly was running the place. Stuart is in a psychiatric facility now. He'll never leave. They tried to rehabilitate him, but his mind is too far gone. He still asks for his mother, still believes he did something wrong that made her leave. And I'm back in my cabin trying to forget the sound he made when we brought him into the light, trying to forget that I was the one who saw the shadow in the attic window in 1998 and did nothing about it. That if I'd pushed harder or looked longer, we might have found him before he spent 3 decades living in the walls, before he killed 8 women, before he became a monster. That's the thing about evil. It's not always the monster. Sometimes it's the people who see the monster and look away. Sometimes it's all of us. Story 2. I spent 23 years as a detective in Washington State, and I've worked cases that would keep most people up at night. Domestic violence cases, child abuse, murders that made the local news for a week and then faded away. But there's one investigation that still sits with me differently than all the others. It happened back in late 2008 and early 2009, and even now when I see someone check in on social media or post their location, I get this uncomfortable feeling in my gut. This is the story of how I hunted a man who used the internet to find his victims, but used the oldest hunting ground in the world to destroy them. This is the story of Garrett Sloan and what we found in the Pinewood Ridge Forest. I was working out of a small station near the Olympic Peninsula, Pinewood Ridge to be exact. It's one of those towns where everyone knows everyone, and the biggest crimes we dealt with were usually drunk drivers or the occasional domestic dispute. Maybe a bar fight on Friday, nights when the logging crews came down from the camps. The forests out there are different from what most people picture when they think of woods. They're not like the friendly hiking trails you see in guidebooks. They're dense, dark rainforests where the moss grows so thick it swallows sound. You can be 10 feet from the main trail and feel like you've stepped into another world entirely. The trees are massive, centuries-old cedars and firs that block out most of the sunlight even at noon. It's beautiful in a way, but it's also suffocating. The air's always damp, always cold, and there's this perpetual twilight under the canopy that makes you lose track of time. I'd grown up in those woods. I knew them well. But after this case, I started seeing them differently. It was November 2008 when everything started. A man named Eugene Halloway was out looking for chanterelles. Mushroom hunting is a big deal out there, especially in the fall when the rains bring them up by the thousands. Eugene was retired former logger, and he knew those woods better than anyone. He'd been walking along one of the lesser-known trails about 8 miles west of town when he stumbled across something that wasn't supposed to be found. At first, he thought it was a mannequin, which tells you how surreal the scene was. But it wasn't. It was a young woman positioned at the base of one of those massive cedar trees facing north, like she'd been placed there deliberately. Eugene called it in, and I got the call around 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. The dispatcher's voice was shaky, which was unusual. She said Eugene sounded badly shaken, and that we needed to get out there fast. I grabbed my partner at the time, a guy named Ben Morley who transferred in from Spokane a year earlier, and we drove out to the trailhead where Eugene was waiting. He was sitting in his truck with the door open, chain-smoking, and staring at nothing. I'd known Eugene for years. He was a tough guy, the kind who didn't rattle easily. But when I approached him, I could see his hands were trembling. He told us he'd left everything exactly as he found it, and that he hadn't touched anything. He gave us the coordinates and said he'd wait at the truck. I told him that was fine, and that we'd come back to get a formal statement later. The hike in took about 30 minutes. Ben and I didn't talk much. The forest was quiet except for the sound of our boots on the wet trail and the occasional drip of water from the branches overhead. I remember feeling the temperature drop the moment we got deeper into the trees. It wasn't just cold. It was damp and heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on you. When we reached the site, I understood immediately why Eugene had been so shaken. The woman, we later identified her as 22-year-old Bridget Lowell, a student from Seattle, wasn't just dumped there. She was arranged. Her hands were at her sides, her legs straight, and her head tilted slightly upward. She was wearing jeans and a jacket, but her shoes were missing. What struck me immediately was what she was bound with. It wasn't rope or duct tape or zip ties. It was fiber optic cabling, the kind you'd use for internet connections. It was wrapped around her wrists and ankles, clean, precise, and strong enough that she wouldn't have been able to break it even if she'd tried. I'd never seen anything like it in all my years on the job. Ben radioed for the medical examiner and the crime scene unit while I started documenting the scene. I took photos from every angle, noting the position of the body, the type of binding the surrounding vegetation. There were no obvious signs of a struggle nearby. No disturbed earth, no broken branches. It was like she'd been placed there gently, which made the whole thing even more unsettling. I walked a perimeter around the site, expanding outward in circles, looking for anything that might give us a lead. About 50 yards to the east, I found her phone. It was smashed, like someone had stomped on it repeatedly. I bagged it and marked the location. The medical examiner, a man named Hugh Fenton, who'd been doing this work longer than I'd been alive, arrived about an hour later with his team. After the initial examination, he pulled me aside and lit a cigarette, which he only did when a case was particularly bad. He told me Bridget hadn't been killed quickly. She'd been kept alive for days in the woods. She was severely dehydrated, and her feet were torn to shreds like she'd been running barefoot through the underbrush for miles. Her toenails were ripped off. There were lacerations all over her legs and arms from branches and thorns. But here's the thing. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle at the end. She looked exhausted, like she'd simply run until her body gave out, and then he'd finished it. Hugh said it looked like she died from a combination of hypothermia exhaustion and a single stab wound to the chest. Clean and efficient. I'd never seen anything like it, and neither had Hugh. We got Bridget's body back to the morgue and started the identification process. Our tech guy, a younger officer named Kyle Rosen, who was way more comfortable with computers than anyone else at the station, managed to pull some data from her smashed phone. That's when I started noticing the pattern. Bridget had been very active on Facebook in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She posted about hiking trips, weekend plans, and meetups with friends. She checked in at a coffee shop in Seattle on October 17th. She'd posted a photo of herself at a trailhead on October 18th with a caption about needing to clear her head. Then, on October 19th, her posts just stopped. No goodbye, no final check-in. Just silence. Her roommate had reported her missing on October 22nd, after she hadn't come home for 3 days, and wasn't answering her phone. I started looking into other missing persons cases in the area and found 2 more women who fit the same profile. Both were in their 20s. Both had been active online. Both had gone silent. Both were still missing. Their names were Clarice Brenner and Heather Stratton. I pulled their files and started building a timeline. The similarities were impossible to ignore. The investigation moved forward, but I'll be honest. We were stumbling in the dark for weeks. The task force that formed wanted to focus on truckers or loggers, the usual suspects for bodies found in remote forests. There were plenty of transient workers in the area, men who moved from job to job and didn't leave much of a paper trail. But something wasn't adding up for me. We'd found tire tracks near the site where Bridget's body was discovered, and they didn't match the profile of a work truck or a logging vehicle. They were from a sedan, something small and fuel-efficient. I remember thinking, who the hell drives a sedan into the woods to dump a body? It didn't make sense. Most of the roads out there were rough, barely maintained logging routes. You needed a truck, or at least an SUV, to navigate them comfortably. Then in early December, we found the second victim. Her name was Clarice Brenner, and she was a 26-year-old graphic designer from Olympia. A couple of hikers found her on a Sunday morning and called it in. She was found about 12 miles from where Bridget had been positioned, also at the base of a cedar tree, also bound with fiber optic cabling. But this time, there was something new. Clarice was wearing a bright neon orange hunting vest, one of those oversized safety vests that hunters wear so they don't get shot. It was at least 3 sizes too big for her, and it was the only thing she had on besides her undergarments. The rest of her clothes were gone. Her feet were in the same condition as Bridget's. torn apart from running. The medical examiner confirmed the same cause of death: exhaustion, hypothermia, and a single stab wound. I stood there in the rain staring at that vest and trying to make sense of it. Why would he dress her in that? Then it hit me like a punch to the gut. He was mocking her. He was turning the idea of safety into a joke. That vest was supposed to protect you in the woods, to make you visible to other hunters. But out here, isolated and alone with no one around for miles, it didn't matter. No one was coming to save her. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about killing. This was a game to him. He was hunting them. He was giving them a head start, making them think they had a chance, and then tracking them down. The orange vest was his way of saying, I can see you, and there's nothing you can do about it. I called Kyle in and asked him to dig into Clarice's online activity. He found that she'd been using an early version of GPS check-ins on a social media app, something that was just starting to become popular back then. She'd posted her location at a trailhead called Elk Ridge about 2 days before she disappeared. Her last post was a photo of the sunset over the mountains with a caption that read, "Sometimes you just need to get away." Kyle also found something else that made my skin crawl. There were IP addresses that had been accessing her profile repeatedly in the days before she vanished. Whoever was looking at her page wasn't just a casual friend or acquaintance. They were methodical. They were studying her. They'd looked at her photos, her posts, her friends list, her check-ins. They were building a profile. That's when I started building my own profile of the killer. This wasn't a drifter or some opportunistic predator who grabbed victims on impulse. This was someone who understood technology, someone who could navigate the early social media landscape and use it to his advantage. He was selecting his victims carefully based on what they posted online. He was looking for women who were active online, who posted about their plans, who checked in at locations. He was looking for women who were isolated or vulnerable, women who went hiking alone or traveled solo. But once he had them, he took them to the one place where technology didn't matter, the deep woods where there was no cell signal, no GPS, no way to call for help. It was brilliant in a sick, twisted way. He was using the modern world to find his victims and then erasing them in the most ancient way possible. We brought in the FBI, and they agreed with my assessment. We were looking for someone with tech skills, but also someone who knew the forest intimately, someone who could move through those woods without getting lost, someone who understood the terrain well enough to set up a hunting ground. The profile narrowed considerably. We started looking at people in the area who fit that description. IT workers, network technicians, anyone who had both the technical knowledge and the outdoor experience. That's when the name Garrett Sloan came up. Garrett was an IT consultant who worked for rural school districts across the peninsula. He drove from town to town, fixing servers, installing software, troubleshooting network issues. He was 41 years old, unmarried, and lived alone. People who knew him described him as quiet, polite, and completely unremarkable. He was the kind of guy you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him. He drove a blue Prius, which matched the tire tracks we'd found at both dump sites. When we pulled his vehicle records and cross-referenced them with the dates and locations of the disappearances, we found that he'd been in the vicinity of both sites around the times the women were believed to have been taken. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to put him on our radar. We started surveillance on Garrett in mid-December. I remember sitting in an unmarked car outside his house on a freezing cold night watching him through the windows. He lived in a small cabin just outside Pinewood Ridge, about 15 minutes from town. The place was neat and organized. Through the window, I could see a small kitchen, a living area with a couch and a TV. Everything looked normal. He came home from work around 6 p.m. most nights, made himself dinner, watched TV for a few hours, and went to bed. On weekends, he'd go for long drives, sometimes into the forest, sometimes just cruising the back roads. We followed him a few times, but he never did anything suspicious. He'd pull over at trailheads, walk around for a bit, and then get back in his car and leave. To anyone watching it, would have looked like he was just a guy who enjoyed nature. But I had this feeling, this nagging instinct, that we were onto something. Then, on January 11, 2009, we got the break we needed. A woman named Heather Stratton was reported missing by her roommate. Heather was a 29-year-old who worked remotely as a web developer. She lived in Olympia, but liked to drive out to the peninsula on weekends to hike. Her roommate said Heather had posted about going on a solo hike on Saturday morning, and when she didn't come home by Sunday night, she started to worry. Kyle traced Heather's last known location to a trailhead called Pine Falls, about 30 miles south of Pinewood Ridge. We pulled traffic camera footage from the area and spotted Garrett's Prius driving toward that same trailhead at 8 a.m. on Saturday, around the same time Heather would have been there. That was enough. We mobilized immediately. I knew we didn't have time to get a warrant. If Heather was still alive, every second counted. We made the call to move in on Garrett's property and hoped we'd find probable cause to search it. When we arrived at his cabin around 10 p.m. that night, he wasn't there. His car was gone and the house was dark. We forced entry through the back door, and what we found inside confirmed every suspicion I'd had. The cabin was split into two sections. The front half looked completely normal. Small kitchen living area, a couch, and a TV. There were dishes in the sink, a half-eaten sandwich on the counter. But the back half was different. There was a heavy wooden door with a deadbolt separating it from the rest of the house. We broke through it and found ourselves in what I can only describe as a command center. There was a workstation with 3 monitors and hard drives stacked on a desk. On the walls, he'd pinned printed screenshots of social media profiles. Dozens of them, all young women. Some of their photos had red X marks drawn over them. Those were the ones we'd found, Bridget and Clarice. But there were others, women who were still alive, still posting, still completely unaware that they were being watched. One of the photos was of Heather. It had been printed that morning. Kyle started going through the hard drives while I searched the rest of the room. What Kyle found was worse than I could have imagined. Garrett had been recording everything. He had footage of the hunts, hours and hours of video shot from trail cameras he'd mounted in the woods. The women were stripped down to their underwear, given those orange vests, and told to run. He'd bark orders at them through a handheld radio, telling them that if they made it out of the forest alive, he'd let them go. They'd run, believing they had a chance. But Garrett had set up the entire thing like a maze. He'd used handheld GPS units to track their movements in real time, and he'd set up a grid system in the forest so he could predict where they'd go. He knew every trail, every clearing, every dead end. It was methodical, calculated, and absolutely sickening. In one video, I watched a woman, later identified as Bridget, collapse from exhaustion. She was begging him to stop. He didn't respond. He just kept filming. But Garrett wasn't at the cabin, which meant he was out there right now with Heather. Kyle pulled up the GPS data from Garrett's devices. He'd saved waypoints for multiple locations in the forest, but one set of coordinates had been accessed that morning. It was a section of forest, about 18 miles northwest of where we were, a remote area called Blackwater Ridge. I grabbed 2 officers, Ben and a younger guy named Terrence, and we headed out immediately. The drive felt like it took forever. My heart was pounding the entire time. I kept thinking about Heather out there in the dark cold and terrified running from a man who had no intention of letting her go. By the time we reached the trailhead, it was nearly midnight and the rain was starting to come down hard. We grabbed our flashlights and radios and hiked into the woods. The trail was barely visible in the dark, and the rain made everything slick and treacherous. I remember slipping on moss-covered rocks and nearly twisting my ankle, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. After about 40 minutes of hiking, we saw a light up ahead. It was faint, just a small glow cutting through the trees. We slowed down and approached quietly. The light was coming from a small clearing about the size of a basketball court. In the center of it was Garrett. He had his back to us, and he was crouched down working on something. As we got closer, I saw Heather. She was on the ground, barely conscious, and Garrett was wrapping fiber-optic cabling around her wrists. Next to him on the ground was a hunting knife and a camcorder still recording. I pulled my weapon and shouted for him to freeze. He turned around slowly, like he'd been expecting us. He didn't look surprised or panicked. He looked annoyed, like we'd interrupted him in the middle of an important task. He stood up and raised his hands, but he kept talking. He started rambling about how we didn't understand what he was doing. He said he was archiving them. He said the internet made people fake. It made them perform versions of themselves that weren't real. Everyone online was curating their lives, posting only the best moments, the happiest photos. He said they'd lost touch with their true selves, with the raw, primal human underneath. He believed that by hunting them, by stripping away everything and forcing them to run until they couldn't anymore, he was revealing their true selves. He was making them real again before he preserved them. He kept saying the word archive over and over like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't let him finish. Ben tackled him to the ground and cuffed him while I ran to Heather. She was hypothermic and in shock, but she was breathing. I wrapped my jacket around her and radioed for an ambulance to meet us at the trailhead. We got her out of there and into the hospital. She spent 2 weeks recovering. When she was finally able to talk, she told us everything. She said Garrett had approached her on the trail that Saturday morning, pretending to be lost. He'd asked her for help with his GPS unit, and when she leaned in to look at the screen, he'd tased her. She woke up hours later in the middle of the forest, with her hands zip-tied, and Garrett standing over her holding a camcorder. He told her to run. He said if she made it out of the forest, he'd let her go. But she said she knew he was lying. She could see it in his eyes. She ran anyway, because what else could she do? She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. She hid whenever she could, but he always found her. He had trail cameras everywhere. He knew exactly where she was at all times. Garrett Sloan was convicted on 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The trial was a media circus. National news picked it up, and suddenly everyone was talking about the dangers of social media and oversharing online. The details that came out during the trial were horrifying. The hard drives we recovered contained terabytes of data, surveillance footage, victim profiles, maps of hunting routes, and recordings of the hunts themselves. He'd been planning this for years. He'd started stalking women online as early as 2006, building profiles on them, learning their habits. He'd even created fake social media accounts to befriend some of them to gain access to their private posts. He was meticulous, patient, and absolutely ruthless. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Garrett showed no emotion when the verdict was read. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 7 life sentences to be served consecutively. I attended the sentencing. I wanted to look him in the eye one last time. He stared at me from across the courtroom, and for a brief moment I thought I saw something. Maybe regret, maybe defiance. But then he looked away, and I never saw him again. I retired a few years after the case closed. I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I looked at a missing persons report, I saw those women bound at the base of those cedar trees. I still think about Heather sometimes and about how close she came to being another file on Garrett's hard drive. She survived because she was smart, because she kept her head, and because we got there in time. She moved away after the trial. I heard she changed her name and deleted all her social media accounts. I don't blame her. The thing that haunts me most about this case is how easy it was for him. Social media was so new back then. People didn't understand the risks. They posted everything, where they were going, what they were doing, who they were meeting. They handed him a road map, and he followed it straight into the darkest parts of the forest. We've gotten smarter since then. People are more careful about what they share online. But every time I see someone check in at a trailhead or post a selfie from a hike, I feel that same uncomfortable twist in my gut. Because I know how quickly safety can turn into a trap, and how the places we go to escape can become the places we never leave. The woods are quiet again now, but I'll never forget what we found out there. I'll never forget the women who ran until they couldn't run anymore, and the man who turned their fear into an archive. Story 3. The internet called it a glitch in the matrix. They said the algorithm was haunted, that a random number generator tapped into the frequency of the dead. But I've been a homicide detective for 20 years, and I know one thing for sure. Algorithms don't kill people. Algorithms don't own bandsaws. And ghosts don't pack human beings into waterproof equipment cases with the precision of a structural engineer. The horror wasn't in the app. The horror was living in the basement of a man who viewed human life as a clutter problem. I didn't get called to a crime scene that morning. I got called to a circus. It was October 2023, and I'd been working major crimes in the coastal towns outside Portland for about 8 years at that point. Harrow's Point was one of those places that looked like a postcard. Jagged cliffs, lighthouse perched on the rocks, fog rolling in thick every morning. Tourists loved it. Locals knew better. The tide there was vicious, unpredictable. People drowned trying to get the perfect photo. We'd pulled more than a few bodies from those rocks over the years. But this was different. The bodies weren't found by a hiker or a patrol car. They were found by 3 terrified kids with a phone app and a live stream audience. By the time I got the call at 6 a.m. that morning, the video already had over 1 million views. My lieutenant was furious. He kept saying we needed to control the narrative, but I knew it was too late for that. The internet moves faster than any police department ever could. I drove out to Harrow's Point with my partner, a younger guy named Caleb Jessup. Good cop. But he spent too much time on social media. He was the one who explained to me what randonauting was. Apparently, there's this app called Vector Z that uses something called quantum random number generation to send people to coordinates. The whole premise is that you set an intention, like show me something hidden or show me something beautiful. And the algorithm spits out GPS coordinates for you to visit. Kids were treating it like a digital Ouija board. The 3 who found the bodies were college students from Portland State. Their names were Ashley Brennan, Cody Moss, and Leah Merritt. When Caleb and I arrived, they were sitting in the back of a patrol car, wrapped in blankets, even though it wasn't that cold. Ashley was the one holding the phone. She'd filmed the whole thing. I asked if I could see the video before it got taken down, and she handed me her phone without a word. Her hands were shaking. I watched it twice. The video started with the 3 of them hiking down the trail toward the lighthouse, laughing and joking around. Cody was narrating, saying they'd set their intention to something buried, and the app had sent them here. The cliff path was narrow and slick with morning dew. You could hear the waves crashing below, loud and relentless. When they reached the rocks at the base of the lighthouse, Leah spotted them. First, two large cases wedged between the boulders, half submerged in tidal pools. They were pelican cases, the kind you use for expensive camera equipment or tools. Heavy-duty, waterproof, built to survive anything. The kids thought maybe they'd found smuggled drugs or stolen goods. Cody joked about it being treasure. That's when Ashley pried open the pressure valve on the first case. The sound on the video was what got me. A sharp hiss of escaping gas, and then Ashley screaming. The smell hit them so hard that Cody threw up on camera. Leah started crying. The video cut off when Ashley dropped her phone. I already knew what was in those cases before we opened them, but knowing doesn't make it easier. The smell was the first thing that hit me, too. It wasn't just decay. It was the smell of confinement. Rotting organic matter that had been sealed in an airtight space for weeks, maybe months. My stomach turned. But I learned a long time ago how to compartmentalize. Caleb wasn't so lucky. He had to step away. The medical examiner arrived about an hour later. Her name was Dr. Lenore Kraft, and she'd been doing this job longer than I had. She took one look inside those cases and said 2 words. Band saw. The dismemberment wasn't messy or frantic. It was methodical. The cuts were clean, almost surgical. Whoever did this had treated it like a carpentry project. The bodies had been sectioned at the major joints, shoulders, hips, knees, and then packed with silica gel packets to delay decomposition. Every piece was wrapped in heavy-duty plastic sheeting and sealed with marine-grade epoxy. It took us most of the day to process the scene and transport everything back to the lab. Dr. Kraft estimated the victims had been dead for at least 6 weeks, maybe longer. Dental records and fingerprints would take time, but she was confident we'd get IDs. I spent that evening reading through the social media explosion. The video had gone viral. Conspiracy theorists were already calling it proof of simulation theory, saying the app had glitched and revealed a pocket of death that wasn't supposed to be found. True crime influencers were demanding answers. I got about 40 emails from podcasters wanting interviews. I ignored all of it. The noise didn't matter. What mattered were the 2 people in those cases. They'd been someone's son, someone's daughter. They'd had lives, routines, people who loved them. My job was to give them their names back. The IDs came through faster than I expected. The male victim was Jared Hines, 32 years old. The female was Lena Kovich, 29. They weren't random drifters. They were a couple, and they'd been reported missing 7 weeks earlier by Lena's sister in Seattle. The sister, Ingrid, told us they'd been living in Harrow's Point, trying to renovate an old shuttle bus they'd bought off Craigslist. They wanted to become van lifers, travel the country, work remote gigs, the dream a lot of young people have these days when rent costs more than a mortgage used to. Ingrid said she'd last spoken to Lena in late August. Lena had sounded stressed. She mentioned that money was tight and that they were living in a basement apartment while working on the bus. She said the landlord was weird, but left it at that. Ingrid didn't push. She wishes now that she had. We pulled their financial records and phone data. The last transactions on their accounts were from a hardware store and a gas station in Harrow's Point. The last GPS ping from both their phones was on September 9th at 11 p.m. The location wasn't the beach. It was a house on the cliffside about 2 miles from where the bodies were found, a mid-century modern place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a perfect view of the ocean. The property records showed it belonged to a man named Arthur Pruitt. Arthur Pruitt, 71 years old, retired structural engineer, no criminal record. On paper, he looked like your average retiree living out his golden years in a beautiful home by the sea. But when Caleb and I showed up at his door the next morning, I knew immediately something was off. The house was immaculate. Not just clean, sterile. The floors were polished to a mirror shine. There wasn't a single item out of place. No clutter, no dust, no signs of life. Arthur answered the door in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, even though it was 8 a.m. on a weekday. He was thin, almost gaunt, with wire-rimmed glasses and hands that wouldn't stop moving. He adjusted his collar 3 times in the first minute of our conversation. I told him we were investigating the disappearance of Jared Hines and Lena Kovich, and that we understood they'd been renting his basement apartment. His face didn't change. He nodded slowly and said yes. They'd rented from him for about 6 weeks before leaving without notice in early September. He said they'd stopped paying rent and had simply vanished one night, taking most of their belongings with them. He claimed he'd tried calling, but their phones were disconnected. I asked if we could see the basement. He hesitated just long enough for me to notice, then agreed. He led us down a narrow staircase into a furnished studio apartment. It was as immaculate as the rest of the house. The bed was made with hospital corners. The kitchenette was spotless. There was no trace of Jared or Lena anywhere. Caleb asked if he'd cleaned the place after they left. Arthur said of course he had. He said he couldn't stand messes. That disorder made him physically uncomfortable. He used the word dissonant to describe how clutter made him feel. That stuck with me. We thanked him for his time and left, but I wasn't done. Something about Arthur Pruitt set off every alarm in my head. I requested a warrant to search the property, citing the GPS data and the suspicious circumstances of the victim's disappearance. The judge granted it by that afternoon. When we came back with the warrant and a forensic team, Arthur's demeanor shifted. He didn't resist, but his hands were shaking. He kept asking if we were going to damage anything, if we'd put things back where we found them. I told him we'd be as careful as possible. But that wasn't good enough for him. He stood in the driveway, wringing his hands while we worked. The house itself was clean, too clean. But the garage was where we found it, Arthur's workshop. At first glance, it looked normal. Workbench, tools hung on pegboards, storage cabinets neatly labeled. But when our forensic tech, a woman named Iris Quaid, hit the lights with a UV scanner, the entire room lit up like a crime scene. Blood spatter on the walls, the floor, the ceiling, arterial spray patterns, cast-off marks from a blade in motion. It was everywhere. We found the bandsaw in the back corner, disassembled and cleaned, but luminol doesn't lie. There was blood in the motor housing, in the joints, in the table grooves. Iris also found traces of human tissue in the drain of the utility sink. In one of the storage cabinets, we found rolls of the same heavy-duty plastic sheeting that had been used to wrap the bodies, along with boxes of silica gel packets and marine epoxy. Arthur was arrested on the spot. I read him his rights in his driveway while he stared at the ground. He didn't say a word. The interrogation took place the next day. Arthur waived his right to an attorney, which surprised me. Most people lawyer up immediately, especially when they're looking at a double homicide. But Arthur wasn't like most people. He sat across from me in the interview room with his hands folded on the table, perfectly still for the first time since I'd met him. I started by asking him to tell me what happened to Jared and Lena. He didn't deny it. He didn't confess in the way you'd expect either. He said they were incompatible with the space. He said they were loud that they argued, that they played music at inappropriate hours. He said their footsteps were arrhythmic and that it disrupted the resonance of his home. I asked him what he meant by resonance, and he explained that he designed the house to be acoustically perfect, that every room had been measured and calibrated for optimal sound quality. He said Jared and Lena were noise pollution. I asked him how he killed them. He said he'd invited them upstairs on the night of September 9th to discuss the overdue rent. He'd made tea. He'd put sedatives in their cups, prescription pills he'd been hoarding for months. Once they were unconscious, he'd moved them to the garage. He said he didn't want them to suffer, that he wasn't cruel. He said what he did next was renovation, that he was removing rot from the foundation. The dismemberment had taken him 3 days. He'd worked in shifts, cleaning between each session. He described the process in chilling detail, how he'd sectioned the bodies, how he'd calculated the weight and volume to ensure the cases would be buoyant enough to drift out to sea, but heavy enough to sink in deep water. He said he'd chosen the coordinates based on tidal charts and ocean current models. He'd dumped the cases from his kayak at 3 a.m. on a moonless night. I asked him if he felt any remorse. He looked at me like I'd asked him if he regretted fixing a leaky pipe. He said no. He said the house was quiet now. He said it was balanced. That's when I noticed the laptop in the evidence box Caleb had brought in. It had been seized from Arthur's home office. I asked Arthur if he used the internet much. He said only for research. I asked him if he'd ever heard of an app called Vector Z. His expression shifted. For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. He admitted he'd been using the app for months, but he didn't use it the way the kids did. He didn't set intentions like, show me something hidden or show me something beautiful. He used it to test entropy. He said he was fascinated by quantum randomness, by the idea that true unpredictability could exist in a deterministic universe. He said he dumped the bodies at coordinates the app had generated days before the murders. I felt my blood run cold. I asked him if he was saying the app told him where to put the bodies. He said no. He said the app had simply provided him with a random location, and he'd used it as a variable in his experiment. He wanted to see if the ocean would take them, or if chaos would intervene. Chaos intervened. The cases washed back to shore, and 3 kids with the same app found them. Arthur was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial was a media spectacle. Defense tried to argue insanity, but the jury didn't buy it. Arthur's actions were too deliberate, too calculated. He was sentenced to life without parole. He's currently in a maximum security facility outside Salem. I've heard he spends most of his time in his cell organizing his belongings. Guards say he rearranges his books by height and color every single day. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. I pulled the data from Arthur's Vector Z account. The app had generated those coordinates on September 3rd, 6 days before he killed Jared and Lena. The kids who found the bodies had set their intention to something buried on October 21st. The app sent them to the exact same coordinates. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in supernatural forces or glitches in the matrix, but I do believe in probability, and the odds of that happening by pure chance are astronomical. Dr. Kraft, the medical examiner, told me once that randomness is just order we don't understand yet. Maybe she's right. Maybe the algorithm picked up on something. Environmental data, geographic anomalies, tidal patterns that made those coordinates significant. Or maybe the universe has a sense of humor. Maybe it wanted those bodies found. I'll never know for sure. Ingrid, Lena's sister, reached out to me after the trial. She thanked me for finding them, for giving them their names back. She said Lena had always believed in signs, in fate, in the idea that the world was trying to tell us something if we just knew how to listen. She asked me if I thought the app was a sign. I told her I didn't know. I told her I was just a detective, not a philosopher. But the truth is, I think about it all the time. I think about those 3 kids stumbling onto a crime scene because an algorithm told them to. I think about Arthur Pruitt, a man so obsessed with order that he dismembered 2 people to restore balance to his home. I think about the randomness of it all, and how it doesn't feel random at all. I deleted Vector Z from my phone. Caleb kept it. He still uses it sometimes, usually as a joke. Last week he set his intention to something funny, and the app sent him to a Taco Bell. He laughed about it. I didn't, because I know what else the app can find. And I know that somewhere out there, someone else is using it to test entropy, to feed chaos, to see what the universe will give them. The question isn't whether the algorithm is haunted. The question is whether we're using it to find the horror or whether we're using it to create it. I don't have an answer. I just have the case file, the evidence, and the memory of 2 people who died because they had the misfortune of being loud in a quiet man's house. The internet moved on. The video got taken down. The conspiracy theories faded. But Jared and Lena are still dead, and Arthur Pruitt is still rearranging his books. That's the job. That's what homicide does to you. You stop seeing glitches, and you start seeing people. You stop hearing ghost stories, and you start hearing the saw. Story 4. I've been a detective for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. Domestic disputes that turned bloody, gang violence, white-collar fraud cases that made my head spin. But nothing prepared me for what happened in Sycamore Ridge back in November of 2024. This case still keeps me up at night, and I'm not entirely sure I can explain why. Maybe by telling you about it, I can finally make sense of what I saw, or maybe I'm just looking for someone else to tell me I'm not losing my mind. It started on a Tuesday night, November 12th to be exact. I was at home finishing up some paperwork from a burglary case when I got the call. Shooting at the Maritime Museum downtown. 1 victim, multiple wounds, but somehow still alive. The dispatcher's voice had that edge to it. The one that means this isn't just another case. The one that means your quiet evening's about to turn into something you'll be working through the night. I grabbed my coat and headed out into the rain. Sycamore Ridge is one of those coastal Oregon towns that always seems to be covered in mist. Pretty if you're a tourist visiting the galleries and seafood restaurants. Oppressive if you actually live there. The kind of place where the fog rolls in so thick you can barely see the car in front of you. When I arrived, the scene was chaos. Ambulance lights cutting through the fog, casting everything in this pulsing red glow. Uniformed officers securing the perimeter with yellow tape, and a small crowd of well-dressed people who'd been at the charity gala inside. They looked shocked, standing there in their evening wear holding champagne glasses they'd apparently forgotten about. The victim was Councilman Silas Gentry, a big deal in our town. Philanthropist, community leader, the kind of guy who showed up to every ribbon cutting and fundraiser with a smile that made you believe he actually cared. He was on a stretcher being loaded into the ambulance, and I caught a glimpse of him before they closed. The doors. 4 shots to the back, 2 to the head. Blood soaking through the white sheets. The fact that he was breathing at all was a miracle. The paramedics were working fast, shouting medical jargon to each other. I remember thinking there was no way he'd make it to the hospital. I found the officer who'd responded first. Young guy named Andy Pruitt. Couldn't have been more than 25. He looked shaken. His hands were trembling as he held his notepad. I've seen that look before. The look of someone who's just seen violence for the first time and is trying to process it. He walked me through what they knew so far, and I took my own notes as he talked. Gentry had been walking to his car alone after the event. His usual security detail had called in sick that day. Just bad luck, or maybe something else. The shooter had approached from the fog, moving with purpose. Multiple witnesses said he walked right up to Gentry, raised his weapon, and fired 6 shots at close range. Then he just stood there, didn't run, didn't panic, didn't even look around to see if anyone was watching. According to a witness who'd been smoking near the side entrance, a woman named Faye Drummond, who worked catering at the event, the shooter had knelt down next to Gentry's body and held something up to his mouth. She said it looked like a phone or maybe one of those professional audio recorders. She was about 30 feet away, and the fog made it hard to see clearly, but she swore she heard him say something. She couldn't make out all the words, but she distinctly heard, "Stop the broadcast," repeated several times. Then the shooter stood up, tucked the device into his jacket, and walked calmly back into the fog like he had all the time in the world. Disappeared into the mist before anyone could react. That detail stuck with me. Who shoots someone 6 times at point-blank range and then stops to record audio from their dying body? That's not rage. That's not a crime of passion. That's calculated. That's ritual. I radioed dispatch and told them to pull every bit of footage from the area. Traffic cams, security cameras from nearby businesses, ATM cameras, anything. We had a description from multiple witnesses. White male, mid-30s, medium build, wearing a dark rain jacket and wire-rimmed glasses. Dark hair, but not too long. Clean-shaven. But that described half the men in town. What we needed was a face, a clear shot that facial recognition could work with. It took until 3 a.m., but we got it. One of the traffic cameras caught him walking away from the scene heading east on Cascade Avenue. The angle was perfect, full frontal view as he passed under a streetlight. His face was calm, almost serene. Facial recognition hit on a guy named Aris Vane. 34 years old, no priors, clean record, not even a speeding ticket. He lived alone in an apartment complex called Pinehurst Towers on the east side of town. Former acoustic engineer, used to work for some Pentagon. Contractor called Helios Defense Solutions, doing classified audio research, psychological warfare applications, advanced signal processing, that kind of thing. He'd resigned abruptly 2 years ago, and as far as we could tell, he'd been living off savings ever since. No employment records, no social media presence, no close friends or family in the area. His emergency contact was listed as a sister in Vermont, but when we called her, she said they hadn't spoken in over a year. She sounded genuinely confused about why we were calling. Just a ghost living among us. I assembled a team, and we raided his apartment at dawn. I remember standing outside the door before we breached it, feeling this weird sense of dread settling in my stomach. I didn't know why. It was a straightforward arrest warrant. We had probable cause. We had witnesses. But something about the whole case felt off. The calmness of the shooter, the recording, the deliberate way he'd moved. When we kicked the door in and entered the apartment, I understood why I'd felt that dread. The apartment was empty. Not empty like someone had moved out and taken their furniture. Empty like someone had stripped it down to the bare walls on purpose. There was no furniture, no bed, no couch, no kitchen table, no decorations on the walls, no dishes in the sink. The windows were covered in thick blackout curtains, and when I pulled one back, I saw that the glass behind it had been covered in some kind of reflective, metallic film. Every wall was lined with gray acoustic foam, the kind you'd see in a professional recording studio. Egg crate pattern, probably expensive. But it wasn't just the walls. The ceiling, too. Even the floor in some places had foam tiles laid down, creating this soundproof box. In the center of the main room was a server rack. It was humming quietly, lights blinking in sequence like something out of a data center. Next to it was a simple metal folding chair and a small desk with a laptop, a pair of high-end studio headphones. I recognized the brand, they cost about $800, and stacks of external hard drives. There must have been 20 or 30 of them, all labeled with dates and alphanumeric codes. The air smelled strange, like ozone, and something else I couldn't place. Burnt metal, maybe, or hot electronics that had been running for days without a break. One of the techs started going through the laptop while I walked through the rest of the space. The bathroom was the only room that seemed normal enough. Toothbrush, soap, a few towels. But even the medicine cabinet was mostly empty, just some basic over-the-counter pain reliever and allergy medication. The bedroom was just another foam-lined box with a sleeping bag in the corner and a pillow with no pillowcase. No personal effects, no photographs, no books, nothing that told you who this person was or what they cared about. It was like he'd eliminated everything from his life except his work. But when I came back to the main room, I noticed something I'd missed on the first pass. There were copper wires running along the edges of the foam panels, all connected in an intricate grid pattern that covered the entire room. They connected to a series of metal plates mounted in the corners. Our tech guy, a kid named Lyle Blackwell, who usually handled digital forensics, took one look at it and said it was a Faraday cage, designed to block electromagnetic signals from coming in or going out. Vane had turned his apartment into a bunker, a sealed environment where he could work without what he probably thought of as interference. The laptop was password protected, but Lyle cracked it within the hour using some forensic software I didn't fully understand. What we found made my stomach turn. Not because it was violent or graphic, but because it was so meticulously organized, so rational in its insanity. There were hundreds of audio files arranged in folders by date and location, all labeled with timestamps and geographic coordinates. I clicked on one at random from a folder marked City Hall, September 2024. It sounded like white noise at first, just static and a low-frequency hum that I could feel more than hear. But Vane had added extensive notes in the file metadata. 4:15 p.m. Subject transmits command phrase during budget meeting. Detected carrier wave modulation at 17 hertz. Witnessed 12 people in attendance exhibit synchronized response. Simultaneous head nodding and agreement vocalizations. Entity signature confirmed. I kept clicking through files. Each one had similar notes written with the precision of a scientific researcher. Subject locations. Alleged transmission times. Frequency analysis with graphs and spectrograms. There were recordings from city council meetings, from the grocery store on Oak Street, from the coffee shop near the library, from community events at the park. And they all centered on one person, Councilman Silas Gentry. Vane had been following him for months, maybe even years, documenting what he believed were broadcast events. Then we found the manifesto. It wasn't called that. The file was titled, The Inaudible Carrier Wave, a Technical Analysis of Parasitic Acoustic Entities. It was over 100 pages long, dense with equations and signal processing terminology that made my head hurt. Charts showing waveforms and frequency distributions. I'm not a scientist. I barely passed physics in high school. but I had to skim through it for my report. The basic premise was insane, but explained with terrifying logic that made it almost sound plausible if you didn't think too hard about it. Vane believed that a non-biological entity existed within certain frequencies of human speech. Not a supernatural being exactly, but something that lived in the physics of sound waves themselves. He claimed that some people, he called them hosts, were biological transmitters for this entity, broadcasting a signal that kept the general population docile and compliant. He had a whole theory about how it worked. The entity supposedly operated in the infrasound range below human conscious perception, but still affecting brain chemistry and emotional states. And he believed Councilman Gentry was one of the most powerful hosts in the entire Pacific Northwest region. He'd mapped out what he called Gentry's transmission network, all the places he regularly appeared and spoke in public. The worst part was how rational it all sounded when you were reading it. Vane cited real physics papers from actual journals, real studies on infrasound and its effects on human psychology, studies about how certain frequencies can cause feelings of unease or dread, how sound can influence behavior. He'd built an entire theoretical framework to justify what was clearly a delusion. He'd even designed what he called a counter-frequency, a sound file he believed could disrupt or kill the entity. That's what was on all those hard drives. Years of research and development. I closed the laptop and rubbed my eyes. The sun was coming up outside, light filtering through gaps in the blackout curtains. We had our motive now. In Vane's mind, he wasn't committing murder. He was stopping a threat, protecting humanity from parasitic entities that no one else could perceive. We had our why. Now we just had to find him. Tracking Vane wasn't easy. He'd planned this carefully. No credit card transactions after the shooting. No phone pings. His cell phone was still in the apartment, sitting on the desk next to the laptop like he'd deliberately left it behind. No vehicle registered in his name, but he'd made one mistake. He needed power to charge equipment. Our analysts went through regional power usage and noticed unusual energy draws at several remote electrical substations along the train line heading east. High-capacity battery charging consistent with someone running portable servers or recording equipment. It was a slim lead, but it was all we had. I coordinated with transit police, and by that evening, we'd confirmed it. Security footage from the train station showed Eris Vane boarding an eastbound train 2 hours after the shooting, carrying a large backpack and a rolling equipment case. He'd paid cash for a ticket to Washington, D.C. That's when everything clicked into place for me. I pulled up Vane's file again and cross-referenced his background. Acoustic engineer, Pentagon contractor, security clearance, advanced degree in signal processing. He wasn't just running. He had a plan. He had a target. I called my FBI contact, an agent named Bryce Kellerman I'd worked with on a human trafficking case a year back, and told him what I thought was coming. They didn't take me seriously at first. Small-town detective with a theory about a guy on a train. But I pushed. I told them Vane's background, his manifesto, his beliefs about broadcast systems. I told them to check with the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. If Vane believed in broadcast entities, he'd go after the broadcast infrastructure itself. He'd try to upload his counter-frequency to the National Emergency Alert System. 30 minutes later, Kellerman called me back. His voice was different, urgent. Vane had been spotted on surveillance near Union Station. He was carrying a heavy backpack and heading toward the FCC headquarters building on M Street. They were mobilizing a response team. Kellerman asked if I wanted to be looped in. I said yes. This was my case. I needed to see it through. I caught the next flight out of Portland. By the time I landed at Reagan National, it was almost over. They briefed me in a Bureau SUV on the way to the scene. Vane had approached the FCC building perimeter fence just after 9 p.m. He wasn't armed with a weapon, but security had spotted the equipment he was carrying. When they tried to stop him for questioning, he'd started shouting about the cure and the counter frequency. He claimed he'd engineered a sound file that, if played over the National Emergency Broadcast System, would kill the entities living in the airwaves. He was trying to throw the hard drives over the security fence. He wanted someone inside the building to find them and upload them to the system. SWAT had moved in when he physically tried to throw the drives over the barrier. I arrived just as they were loading him into a transport van. His hands were zip-tied behind his back, but he wasn't struggling. He was smiling. Not a manic smile, but something peaceful, almost serene, like he'd accomplished something meaningful and was at peace with whatever came next. I asked the team lead if I could speak to him. They weren't happy about it, but Kellerman vouched for me. They said I had 5 minutes. I climbed into the back of the van and sat across from him on the metal bench. Up close, he looked exhausted, thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was disheveled, and there was a bruise forming on his cheek from where they'd tackled him. But his gaze was sharp and focused, not the eyes of someone lost in madness. He looked at me with curiosity, studying my face. I introduced myself and told him I was the lead investigator on the Gentry shooting. I told him I'd been to his apartment. I'd seen his work. I'd read his manifesto. He perked up at that, leaning forward slightly despite the restraints. "Then you understand," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, with that educated tone of someone used to explaining complex ideas. "You heard the signal." I told him I'd heard his recordings. White noise, static, nothing more. He shook his head slowly, like a teacher disappointed in a student who wasn't getting the concept. "You're not listening correctly. Most people can't. The entity operates below conscious perception. But it's there. It's always been there." He paused, studying my face like he was trying to read something in my expression. "You're a detective. You deal in evidence, pattern recognition. I gave you evidence, hundreds of hours of recordings, frequency analysis, spectrograms showing modulation patterns. You saw the data, the correlation between Gentry's appearances and population compliance metrics. I asked him why Gentry specifically, why target him, why that night. Vane's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "He's been broadcasting for years. I tracked him, mapped his transmission schedule, documented his range and influence. November 12th was a convergence point, a charity gala with maximum population density in the reception area. Over 200 people in close proximity. He was going to reach all of them simultaneously. I had to stop the broadcast. I had to sever that node from the network." I asked him about the recording he made after the shooting. What exactly was he trying to capture? For the first time, Vane's composure cracked. He looked down at his hands, at the zip ties cutting into his wrists. "I thought if I recorded the signal at the exact moment of termination, I could isolate the entity signature. Proof that it existed outside the host body. Proof that it was real and not just..." He trailed off, his jaw clenching. "But the broadcast didn't stop. Even after I fired. Even after he fell. The signal continued. That's when I realized the network was bigger than I thought. Gentry was just one node. There are others. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. The entity is distributed." They pulled me out of the van then. My 5 minutes were up. As I climbed out, Vane called after me, his voice rising. "Listen to the recordings again, detective. Late at night, when it's quiet and your mind is clear, you'll hear it. I know you will. You have the ears for it. Not everyone does, but you do. You'll understand. The trial happened 4 months later, in February. I testified about the evidence we'd collected. The surveillance footage, the manifesto, the apartment setup, the clear premeditation. Vane's court-appointed defense attorney tried to argue insanity. She brought in psychiatrists who talked about paranoid schizophrenia and delusional disorder. But Vane wouldn't cooperate with his own defense. He insisted on representing himself for part of the proceedings. He stood at the podium and spoke for nearly an hour, laying out his theory with the precision and methodology of an academic lecture. He showed charts printed on poster board. He cited studies and played audio clips. He explained the physics of infrasound and its neurological effects. For a moment during his presentation, I watched the jury and I saw something that disturbed me. I saw doubt flicker across a few faces. Not doubt about his guilt, that was clear. Doubt about their own perception, about what they could and couldn't hear. That's how convincing he was. That's how rational he made his insanity sound. He didn't rant. He didn't ramble. He built an argument like an engineer solving a problem. The verdict was guilty. That was never in question. But the judge sentenced him to a high-security psychiatric facility instead of a regular prison. Indefinite commitment until he was deemed no longer a threat. The DA seemed satisfied with that outcome. Councilman Gentry had survived and made a full recovery. The wounds had all missed vital structures by millimeters. It was being called a miracle in the local press. The case was closed. Everyone could move on, but I couldn't let it go. I kept thinking about what Vane had said in the van, about listening late at night, about me having the ears for it. I told myself it was just professional thoroughness. I needed to write a complete case report. I needed to understand the mind of the perpetrator for my file. But really, I think I was just curious, or maybe I was already infected by his madness and didn't know it yet. I started listening to the recordings at home in my study. I'd wait until late at night when my wife was asleep. I'd put on my headphones, close my eyes, and play the files Vane had labeled as his strongest evidence. At first, it was just what I expected. White noise, environmental ambience, distant traffic sounds, and Gentry's voice giving a speech or talking to someone at a community meeting. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. But after a few nights of this, something changed. Maybe it was because I was tired. Maybe it was because I'd been staring at case files and audio spectrograms for too long. But I started to notice something underneath Gentry's voice, a low rhythmic pulse. It was subtle, barely audible even with good headphones. But once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. It reminded me of a heartbeat or distant machinery, a thrumming sound that seemed to sit right at the edge of my perception. I told myself it was pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find patterns in randomness. I'd read about it in the case file. Vane's psychiatrist had mentioned it in his evaluation as a classic symptom. But the more I listened, the more structured it seemed. It had a cadence, a repetition. It wasn't random noise. It was regular, periodic. I started hearing it in other recordings, too. Different events, different locations, but always there underneath Gentry's voice. I stopped listening to the files after that. I filed my final report, closed the case folder, sealed the evidence, and moved on to other work. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd let Vane's delusion get into my head. But every so often I'd see Gentry on the local news. He'd recovered from the shooting and was back to his public duties, fundraisers, city council meetings. press conferences about community development initiatives, and every time I saw him on screen, I'd feel this pull to turn up the volume, to listen closely, just to prove to myself that there was nothing there. Last week, I was at home watching the late news. My wife had gone to bed early, and I was having a beer on the couch, trying to unwind after a long shift. Gentry was being interviewed about some new waterfront development project. I wasn't really paying attention until the anchor asked him about the shooting. How was his recovery going? Did he have any message for his attacker? Gentry gave his standard response, grateful to be alive, no hard feelings toward Vane, hoped he'd get the help he needed. All very diplomatic and forgiving. But as he spoke, I noticed I'd turned the volume up without thinking about it. I was leaning forward, my ear close to the TV speaker, and I heard it, that low rhythmic thrumming sound, pulsing just below his voice, the same pattern I'd heard in Vane's recordings. I froze. My heart started pounding. My hands went cold. I told myself it was the audio compression from the broadcast, the TV speakers, electromagnetic interference from my phone or the Wi-Fi router. I grabbed the remote and muted the TV. The sound stopped. I unmuted it. The sound came back, perfectly synchronized with Gentry's speech. I unplugged the TV entirely, pulled the cord out of the wall. The screen went dark. But in the silence of my living room, I could still hear it, faint and distant like it was coming from inside my own head. That same pulse, that same rhythm. I sat there in the dark, listening to it, feeling my pulse quicken. I don't know if it's real. I don't know if Vane's madness has somehow transferred to me through exposure to his work, or if there's something else going on that I'm too afraid to examine too closely. All I know is that I hear it now, and I can't make it stop. I haven't told anyone. Not my wife, not my captain, not the department psychiatrist. What would I even say? That the detective who closed the case against a delusional shooter is now experiencing the same delusions. That I think I'm hearing the same signal he claimed to hear. They'd put me on leave. Maybe refer me to the same facility where Vane is locked up. Councilman Gentry is still out there, still giving speeches, still showing up on the news with that warm smile and that reassuring voice, still attending community events. And every time I see him, I wonder, what if Vane was right? What if there really is something in the signal, something we're not supposed to hear? Something that most people can't perceive but affects them anyway. I've thought about reaching out to Vane, visiting him at the facility where he's being held, asking him what to do, how to make it stop, whether there's a way to block it or filter it out. But I can't, because if I do that, then I'm admitting that I'm compromised, that I've crossed some line I can't come back from, that I believe him. So I just sit here, in the quiet of my house late at night, listening to that pulse, wondering if it's real or if I'm losing my mind, wondering if it even matters at this point. Because either way, I can't unhear it now, and I don't think I ever will. Sometimes I think about what Vane said in that van, about how most people can't hear it because it's below conscious perception, but it still affects them, still influences their behavior and emotions. And I wonder how many other people are out there hearing it too, lying awake at night, questioning their own sanity, noticing that strange pulse beneath certain voices, too afraid to speak up because they know how it sounds. Maybe you've heard it. Maybe you're hearing it right now, and you've just been telling yourself it's nothing. The hum of electronics, the ringing in your ears from that concert last month, background noise, air conditioning, your imagination. But what if it's not? What if Vane was trying to save us from something we don't even know is there? What if he saw something real that the rest of us are blind to? I don't have answers. I don't think I ever will. All I know is that the case is closed. Vane is locked away in a facility, somewhere undergoing treatment for a disorder that maybe he doesn't actually have, and Gentry is still broadcasting. And I'm still listening, still hearing that pulse, still wondering if I'm the one who's crazy or if everyone else is just deaf. The other day, I drove past the Maritime Museum where it all happened. There's no sign of what occurred there. No memorial. No marker. Just the same building with the same parking lot where Silas Gentry was shot 6 times and somehow survived. I sat in my car for a while, staring at the spot where he fell. And I thought about Vane standing there in the fog, holding that audio recorder, trying desperately to capture proof of something no one else could see. I thought about his apartment, that soundproofed bunker where he spent years gathering evidence that only made sense to him. And I wondered if maybe I should have listened more carefully the first time. If maybe the signal was there all along and I just wasn't paying attention. If maybe Vane wasn't crazy at all. He was just the only one who could hear what the rest of us are deaf to. I guess I'll never know for sure, but I'll keep listening. Because now that I've heard it once, I can't stop hearing it. It's always there, just beneath the surface, waiting. Story 5. I still think about the Shermanwood Ridge case. Not every day, but often enough that it creeps into my mind when I'm trying to fall asleep or when I'm sitting alone in my car waiting for a call. I'm a homicide detective, have been for nearly 18 years, and I've worked cases that would turn your stomach. Domestic murders, gang violence, cold cases that stretch back decades. But this one was different. This one made me question things I didn't want to question. This happened between late 2022 and early 2023. I work major crimes in a jurisdiction that covers parts of southern Oregon, near the Nevada border. It's mostly rural out here. Small towns, thick forests, people who like their privacy and don't ask too many questions. The kind of place where you can disappear if you want to. The case started simple enough. A grandmother named Winifred Winters filed a missing persons report for her grandchildren, twin 12-year-olds named Piper and Marcus. She hadn't heard from them in 4 months. The mother, a woman named Rhea Winters, had been dodging her calls, screening her voicemails, and making excuses. Winifred was in her 70s, sharp as a tack, and visibly upset when I met her at the station. Her hands trembled as she showed me photos of the kids. Smiling faces, gap-toothed grins. 2 kids who looked happy and loved. She told me Rhea had always been a little odd, into spiritual stuff, New Age philosophies, crystals and tarot cards and that sort of thing, but never neglectful. The kids had always been healthy and happy. Then, about a year ago, Rhea met someone new, a man Winifred had never been introduced to, and everything changed. Phone calls became infrequent. Visits stopped entirely. When Winifred asked about the man, Rhea would get defensive and change the subject. Winifred drove out to the rental property, where Rhea was living with the kids on 3 separate occasions. Each time no one answered the door. She could see movement inside through the curtains, shadows passing by the windows, but they wouldn't come out. The last time she went, she stood on the porch for 20 minutes, knocking and calling out their names. Nothing. She said she could hear voices inside, but they never answered. That's when she came to me. I took the case, figuring it would be straightforward. Maybe Rhea was in an abusive relationship and was scared to reach out. Maybe she'd gotten involved with drugs and didn't want her mother to know. I've seen it 100 times before. Families fall apart in slow motion, and no one wants to admit what's happening until it's too late. I drove out to the address Winifred gave me, a small ranch-style house on the outskirts of a town called Pine Haven, about 40 minutes from my office. The place was isolated, surrounded by tall pines and not much else. The nearest neighbor was at least a mile down the road. The driveway was muddy and rutted, barely passable. There was a single car parked out front, an older sedan, covered in a layer of dirt and pine needles. The windows of the house were dark, even though it was mid-afternoon. I knocked on the door, and a woman answered almost immediately. Rhea Winters. She was in her late 30s, thin, almost gaunt, with long dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She smiled at me, calm, friendly even. That was the first thing that struck me. She wasn't nervous. She didn't ask why I was there or what I wanted. She just stood there waiting like she'd been expecting me. Most people get tense when a detective shows up at their door. They fumble with their words, they ask questions, they get defensive. Rhea did none of that. I introduced myself and explained that her mother had filed a welfare check on the children. Rhea nodded slowly, her expression unchanging, and invited me inside. The house was clean but strange. The furniture was minimal, just a couch, a small table, a few chairs. There were no toys, no backpacks, no sneakers by the door, no signs that kids lived there at all. The walls were covered in printouts, diagrams, and handwritten notes. I couldn't make sense of most of it at first glance. Equations, timelines, charts with dates circled in red marker. Some of the papers had symbols I didn't recognize. It looked like the work of someone obsessed with something I couldn't understand. I asked where the children were. Rhea sat down on the couch and folded her hands in her lap. She looked directly at me, her eyes clear and steady, and told me they were at a specialized school in Switzerland for gifted children. She said it calmly, matter-of-factly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I asked for the name of the school, and she rattled it off without hesitation. The Alpine Academy for Advanced Studies, she called it. I wrote it down. I asked if I could speak to the kids, and she said they weren't allowed personal calls during the semester. Strict policy, she explained, but that she'd received a voice message from them just a few days ago. She pulled out her phone and played it for me. Two voices, a boy and a girl, talking about their classes and how much they missed home. The girl mentioned learning French. The boy talked about a field trip to the Alps. It sounded real enough, but something about it felt off. The tone was flat, too rehearsed, like they were reading from a script. There was no background noise, no other kids talking or laughing in the distance, just their voices in what sounded like a quiet, empty room. I asked Rhea how she was paying for the school, and she said a benefactor was covering the costs. I asked who, and she just smiled. She told me his name was Dr. Jasper Langford, and that he was a brilliant man who understood the nature of reality better than anyone she'd ever met. I asked if I could speak to Dr. Langford, and she said he was traveling, but that she'd have him call me when he returned. I gave her my card and told her to have him reach out as soon as possible. She took the card and set it on the table without looking at it. I asked a few more questions about the kids, about when she'd last seen them in person, about the arrangements for the school. Her answers were vague, but delivered with complete confidence. I left the house with more questions than answers. The whole interaction felt wrong. Rhea wasn't defensive or evasive. She was cooperative, almost eager to explain things, but none of it added up. The house, the lack of any evidence that children lived there, the too perfect story about Switzerland. It all felt staged. Back at the station, I ran the name of the school through every database I had access to. It didn't exist. I contacted Interpol just to be sure. Nothing. No Alpine Academy for advanced studies in Switzerland or anywhere else in Europe. I pulled up Dr. Jasper Langford next. What I found made my stomach drop. Jasper Langford was a former physicist who'd been dismissed from a university research position in 2018 after publishing a series of papers that his peers called pseudoscientific nonsense. He'd made claims about quantum mechanics and consciousness that weren't backed by any legitimate research. He'd argued that human consciousness could be measured in frequency patterns, and that certain frequencies indicated a person was real, while others indicated they were artificial constructs. He'd gone off the grid after that, resurfacing a few years later on fringe forums and obscure podcasts, talking about simulation theory and something he called retrocausality displacement. According to him, the world had ended in 2012, the Mayan calendar prediction, and we were all living in a decaying simulation. He claimed certain people were echoes, soulless copies generated by the system to fill in gaps left by deleted individuals. He believed the simulation was glitching more and more each year and that only a small number of true souls remained. I thought it was nonsense. Delusional ramblings from someone who'd lost their grip on reality. But then I started digging deeper. I found a manifesto he'd written called The Null Protocol. It was over 300 pages long, dense and incoherent in places, but certain sections were chillingly clear. He outlined specific dates he believed the simulation would update and purge corrupted data. He wrote about the moral imperative to free bandwidth by eliminating echoes before the final reset. He used technical language, equations, diagrams. He made it sound scientific, logical even. He wrote that killing an echo wasn't murder. It was system maintenance. I cross-referenced those dates with the local deaths in the area. My hands were shaking when I saw the pattern. 6 months before Ria's children disappeared, Jasper's wife, a yoga instructor named Vivian Langford, died in her sleep. She was 40 years old, healthy, no history of medical issues. The coroner ruled it a cerebral hemorrhage, rare but not unheard of. A month after that, Ria's ex-husband was shot in a parking lot outside a grocery store. The shooter was Ria's brother, who claimed self-defense. He said the ex-husband had attacked him with a knife. The brother died 2 weeks later from an apparent overdose. Fentanyl. Every single death lined up with a date in Jasper's manifesto. The dates he'd marked as system purge windows. I brought my findings to my lieutenant. He agreed we had enough for a deeper investigation. I pulled the audio recording Ria had played for me and sent it to a forensic audio specialist. It took them less than a day to confirm what I already suspected. The voices were deep fakes generated using AI software. The specialist showed me the waveforms, pointed out the telltale signs of synthetic speech. The background noise didn't match a Swiss boarding school. It matched the ambient hum of a basement with poor ventilation and old HVAC systems. I got a warrant. When I arrived at the house with a team 2 days later, Ria and Jasper were both there. Jasper was older than I expected, maybe late 50s, with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like a professor, not a killer. Thin build, soft-spoken, calm. He was wearing a cardigan and khaki pants. They didn't resist. They didn't try to run. Jasper even opened the door for us before we knocked. He asked if we'd like tea. I told him we had a warrant to search the premises, and he nodded like it was perfectly reasonable. Ria sat on the couch and watched us work, her expression serene. She didn't ask what we were looking for. She didn't demand to call a lawyer. She just sat there. We found the children's belongings in a storage closet. Clothes folded neatly, school supplies still in their backpacks, drawings pinned to a corkboard. We found journals in Ria's handwriting. Page after page of observations about Piper and Marcus. She'd been tracking their behavior for months, noting every time they acted off or seemed distant. She assigned them percentages, grading their soul integrity like it was a science experiment. 97%, then 89%, then 76%. The entries became more frantic as the numbers dropped. She wrote about how Marcus had stopped laughing at her jokes, how Piper didn't remember a story they'd read together the month before, how their eyes looked different, empty, how they moved in ways that seemed mechanical. The final entry was dated 3 months prior. It read, 0%. The glitch has consumed them. They are not my children anymore. Formatting is required. We searched the property for hours. The basement was the worst. It was lined with copper wires strung along the walls in intricate patterns. There were server racks that weren't even plugged in, just empty metal frames sitting in the corner. In the center of the room was a chair surrounded by symbols drawn in chalk. Strange geometric patterns, numbers, what looked like circuit diagrams. Jasper called it the Ascension Room. He said it was where they'd help the echoes dissolve back into the code. He explained it all very calmly, like he was giving a tour of a laboratory. He pointed to the copper wire and explained it was meant to ground the signal. He showed us notebooks filled with measurements and observations. He genuinely believed he was conducting scientific research. We brought in ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. The dogs hit on a section of the backyard near the tree line, about 30 feet from the house. We started digging. The soil was soft, recently disturbed. The bodies were wrapped in lead sheeting, buried about 4 feet down. Piper had been dismembered and partially burned. Marcus was bound in copper wire, his hands tied behind his back. The coroner estimated they'd been dead for at least 3 months, possibly longer. The cause of death for both was asphyxiation. They'd been suffocated. I've interrogated a lot of killers. Most of them break eventually. They cry, they confess, they try to justify what they did. They blame their childhood and their circumstances, the victim. They show remorse, or at least pretend to. Jasper and Ria didn't break. And when I sat across from Jasper in the interrogation room, he looked at me with something close to pity. He told me I was angry because my programming was malfunctioning. He said I was an echo, too, that he could see my code decaying in real time. He spoke with absolute conviction, like he was explaining basic math to a child who just didn't understand. I asked him if he felt any guilt about what he'd done. He looked genuinely confused by the question. He said you can't feel guilty about fixing a broken machine. I asked him if he understood that Piper and Marcus were real children, that they'd felt pain and fear. He shook his head and told me that pain is just a signal, fear is just a subroutine, and that the children I was describing had ceased to exist long before he'd performed the necessary corrections. He said the real Piper and Marcus had been deleted months ago, and what remained were just empty vessels running corrupted code. Ria was the same way. She cried when I showed her photos of the bodies, but not because she felt guilty. She cried because she said she'd failed to save them in time. She believed, truly believed, that her children had been replaced months before she killed them. She said the real Piper and Marcus were gone, deleted by the simulation, and that the things she'd buried in the backyard weren't human. She kept asking me if I understood, if I could see what she was trying to tell me. She wanted me to validate her delusion, to agree that she'd done the right thing. She talked about how hard it had been to watch them deteriorate, to see the glitches multiply, to know that her real children were gone forever. They were both declared competent to stand trial. The psychologists who evaluated them said they showed no signs of traditional psychosis. They weren't hearing voices or experiencing hallucinations. They'd simply constructed an elaborate belief system and acted on it with cold logic. The defense tried to argue insanity, but the prosecution showed that Jasper and Rhea had taken deliberate steps to cover up the murders. They'd created fake audio evidence. They'd buried the bodies. They'd maintained the facade that the children were alive and at school. That showed planning and awareness of wrongdoing. The jury convicted them both. Life sentences without parole. I still think about the case more than I should. Not because of the brutality, I've seen worse, but because of the certainty. Jasper and Rhea never wavered. They never second-guessed themselves. They looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't real. And they meant it. There was no moment of clarity, no breaking point where they realized what they'd done. They're still in prison now, still writing letters about the simulation and the final reset. They think they're martyrs. They think they're the only ones who can see the truth. Sometimes late at night, when I'm alone, I catch myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I think about what Jasper said. I think about how easy it would be to believe that nothing is real, that we're all just lines of code in a failing system. Then I think about Piper and Marcus, about how scared they must have been in those final moments, and I remind myself that the horror isn't the delusion itself. It's the absolute, unshakable conviction that allows someone to do the unthinkable and sleep soundly afterward. I don't know if Jasper and Rhea were insane or evil or something in between. What I do know is that they took two children who trusted them and erased them from existence, and they did it without hesitation. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not the ideology or the manifesto or the fake science. It's the fact that love, or whatever twisted version of it they felt, wasn't enough to stop them. They looked at their own children and saw nothing but glitches that needed to be corrected. They chose a delusion over reality. And two kids paid the price. The case is closed now. The files are sealed. Winifred Winters passed away 6 months after the trial. I went to her funeral. There weren't many people there, but every few months I still get a letter from Rhea. She writes to me from prison, long rambling letters about the simulation and the coming reset. She says she's worried about me. She says she can tell I'm starting to wake up, and that when I do, I'll understand why she did what she did. She draws diagrams in the margins, equations that don't mean anything. I don't read them anymore. I just add them to the file and try to forget. But I can't forget Piper and Marcus. I think about the drawings we found in that storage closet, stick figures of a family holding hands under a smiling sun. I think about the stuffed animals and the birthday, cards and the little shoes lined up neatly by the door. I think about the fact that somewhere in Rhea's mind she convinced herself that the children who drew those pictures and wore those shoes were gone, replaced by something less than human. And I wonder how someone gets to that place. How does a mother look at her own child and see a stranger? How does a person become so lost in a delusion that they can justify the unjustifiable? I don't have an answer. I don't think I ever will. All I know is that the Shermanwood Ridge case changed the way I see people. It made me realize that the scariest thing in the world isn't monsters or demons or ghosts. It's the human mind and what it's capable of justifying when it wants to badly enough. Jasper and Rhea didn't think they were murderers. They thought they were heroes, saving the world one deletion at a time. They thought they were doing something noble, something necessary. And that's the part I'll never be able to reconcile. That's the part that still keeps me awake.